A wealthy doctor, a frozen dinner, and a murder so meticulously planned that it took investigators 27 years to crack. This is the story of how one tiny mistake exposed the perfect crime. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most chilling cases of premeditated murder in modern history. You're about to discover how a respected medical professional used his expertise to commit what he thought was the flawless crime. We'll explore the meticulous planning, the shocking execution, and the microscopic detail that eventually brought justice after nearly 3 decades. By the end of this video, you'll understand how forensic science evolved specifically because of this case, and why sometimes the smallest oversight can unravel even the most brilliant criminal mind. Stay with me because this story has more twists than you can imagine. It was May 8, 1985, in a quiet suburb of Detroit, Michigan. Barbara Stager was a beloved elementary school teacher, known for her warm smile and dedication to her students. Her husband, Russell Stager, was a successful respiratory therapist at a local hospital. To everyone who knew them, they were the perfect couple. Church-going, friendly, living the American dream in their comfortable 2-story home. But on that spring morning, everything changed. Russell called 911 at 6:47 a.m., his voice trembling with panic. "My wife," he gasped into the phone. "She's been shot. Please, you have to help her. There's blood everywhere." When paramedics arrived 4 minutes later, they found Barbara Stager lying in bed, a single gunshot wound to her head. A .25 caliber handgun lay on the floor beside the bed. Russell was in the hallway, shaking, still in his pajamas. He told the responding officers a horrifying story. He'd been awakened by a loud noise, turned on the light, and discovered his wife bleeding. He claimed she must have shot herself, though he couldn't understand why. They had no marital problems. Everything was fine. She'd seemed happy just hours before. The initial investigation seemed straightforward. The gun was registered to Russell. He kept it for home protection. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. The door had been locked from the inside. Barbara's fingerprints were found on the weapon. But here's where the problem begins. Barbara was right-handed, yet the gun was found on the left side of the bed. The bullet entered behind her right ear at a downward angle, an almost impossible trajectory for a self-inflicted wound. And perhaps most tellingly, Barbara's life insurance policy had been increased to $150,000 just 6 months earlier. Detective Mike Thompson, a veteran investigator with the Durham County Police Department, couldn't shake his suspicions. Something felt wrong. When he interviewed Russell 3 days after the funeral, the widower seemed too composed, too rehearsed. Every answer came a little too quickly, a little too perfectly constructed. But without concrete evidence, without a witness, and with forensics that could go either way, the case stalled. The coroner ruled the death undetermined. Not quite suicide, not quite homicide. Russell collected the insurance money. He moved away. He remarried within 18 months. And for 27 years, he got away with murder. The obstacle facing investigators was enormous. How do you prove someone committed murder when the crime scene suggests suicide? How do you overcome the perfect alibi of, "I was sleeping right beside her"? And most importantly, how do you build a case when the suspect has meticulously covered every track, anticipated every question, and eliminated every witness? Detective Thompson never forgot Barbara Stager. Even after he retired in 1998, the case haunted him. He kept the file boxes in his garage, spending weekends reviewing crime scene photos, autopsy reports, and witness statements. His wife thought he was obsessed. Maybe he was. But obsession sometimes pays off. In 2003, 18 years after Barbara's death, Thompson received a call that would change everything. A woman named Jo Lynn Snow had contacted the cold case unit. She had information about Russell Stager, information that couldn't be ignored. Jo Lynn had been Russell's second wife. They'd married in 1987, just 2 years after Barbara's death, and divorced in 1995. During their marriage, Jo Lynn said Russell had been controlling, manipulative, and increasingly violent. But it wasn't his behavior during their marriage that brought her forward. It was something she'd found while packing to move out. Hidden in Russell's locked filing cabinet, behind tax returns and medical journals, Jo Lynn had discovered a notebook. A spiral-bound, college-ruled notebook filled with Russell's handwriting. And what she read in those pages made her blood run cold. The notebook contained detailed plans, diagrams of their bedroom, notes about insurance policies, research on gunshot wounds and blood spatter patterns, and most chillingly, a timeline labeled after. This timeline outlined exactly what Russell would do following what he called the incident. How long to wait before calling 911, between 3 to 5 minutes for maximum believability, what to say to police, short sentences, appear shocked, mention suicide, and even which family members to call first. Jo Lynn had been too terrified to come forward at the time. Russell had threatened her during the divorce, and she'd moved across the country to escape him. But when she learned he'd remarried again, to a woman named Patricia, something inside her snapped. She couldn't let another woman become a victim. Armed with Jo Lynn's testimony and the notebook, Detective Thompson came out of retirement to work with the cold case unit. They now had evidence of premeditation, but they still needed to prove Russell had actually pulled the trigger 27 years ago. The team decided to re-examine every piece of physical evidence using modern forensic techniques that hadn't existed in 1985. Blood spatter analysis had evolved dramatically. DNA testing was now standard. And most importantly, forensic pathologists had developed new ways to analyze gunshot wounds and determine the position of the shooter. Dr. Jennifer Wu, a forensic pathologist who specialized in gunshot wound analysis, was brought in to review Barbara's autopsy photos and reports. What she found was damning. The entrance wound behind Barbara's right ear showed characteristics that were inconsistent with suicide. The angle of entry, approximately 15 degrees downward, would have required Barbara to hold the gun above and behind her own head while pulling the trigger. Dr. Wu conducted experiments with volunteers holding weapons in various positions. The conclusion was clear. It was biomechanically nearly impossible for Barbara to have shot herself in that location at that angle. Furthermore, Dr. Wu noticed something the original medical examiner had missed: stippling patterns on the skin around the wound. These tiny dots, caused by gunpowder particles, indicated the gun had been fired from approximately 6 to 8 inches away. In genuine contact or close-range suicides with handguns, the weapon is typically pressed directly against the skin or held within 1 to 2 inches. But the most compelling evidence came from a revolutionary new technique called bloodstain pattern analysis. Forensic specialist Robert Chen examined high-resolution scans of the original crime scene photos. What he discovered would crack the case wide open. Blood doesn't lie. When a gunshot wound occurs, blood spatter creates patterns that can reveal the position of the victim, the location of the shooter, and the sequence of events. In 1985, investigators had noted the blood on the sheets and walls but hadn't analyzed the patterns in detail. Chen's analysis revealed something shocking. The blood spatter on the wall behind the bed showed a distinct void pattern, an area where blood should have been but wasn't. This void was roughly the size and shape of a human torso. Someone had been standing between Barbara and the wall when she was shot. That someone had blocked the blood spatter, creating the void. And that someone had moved away after the shooting, which explained why the void existed at all. The implications were staggering. Barbara couldn't have shot herself if someone else was standing in the way of the blood spatter. The evidence now pointed to only one conclusion. Russell Stager had stood beside the bed, aimed the gun at his sleeping wife's head, and fired. He'd then carefully placed the gun near her hand, positioned her fingerprints on the weapon, and waited exactly 4 minutes before calling 911, just as his notebook had outlined. With this new evidence, Prosecutors felt confident they could finally charge Russell Stager with first-degree murder. But there was still work to do. They needed to establish motive, prove opportunity, and most importantly, demonstrate that Russell had the knowledge and means to stage a suicide. Investigators discovered that Russell had checked out multiple books from the public library in the months before Barbara's death. Books about forensic science, crime scene investigation, and even a manual for police officers responding to shooting scenes. His internet search history from his hospital computer showed queries about staging suicide, undetectable murder, and life insurance investigation procedures. The financial motive became clearer as well. Russell had accumulated significant gambling debts, nearly $89,000 at various casinos in Atlantic City. He'd taken out loans he couldn't repay. His credit cards were maxed out. The $150,000 insurance payout would solve all his problems. But perhaps the most chilling discovery came from Barbara's best friend, Margaret Chen. In a new interview conducted in 2011, Margaret revealed that Barbara had confided in her just weeks before her death. Barbara said she was planning to leave Russell. She'd discovered he was having an affair with a nurse at the hospital. She'd consulted a divorce attorney. She was going to file papers the following month. Russell Stager had a motive to kill his wife, the means to stage her death as suicide, and the opportunity to do so while she slept. He'd researched how to commit the perfect murder. He'd increased her life insurance. And he'd meticulously planned every detail. But he'd made one critical error. He hadn't accounted for how forensic science would evolve over the next. As investigators built their case, they had another pressing concern: Russell's current wife, Patricia. The pattern was becoming clear. Russell married women with substantial assets or high life insurance policies. He maintained the image of a devoted husband for several years. Then something would happen. Detectives interviewed Patricia under the guise of a routine inquiry. What they learned terrified them. Russell had recently asked Patricia to update her life insurance policy, naming him as the sole beneficiary. He'd been researching firearms, specifically the same caliber weapon used to kill Barbara. And Patricia had mentioned to friends that Russell had been insisting she take sleeping pills for her insomnia, prescription medication that would make her drowsy and unaware. The team realized they were potentially looking at a serial killer in the making, a man who killed for insurance money and had perfected his method over decades. They made the decision to accelerate the investigation and arrest Russell before he could strike again. On November 15, 2012, 27 years, 6 months, and 7 days after Barbara Stager's death, police arrested Russell Stager at his home. He was 63 years old, still working as a respiratory therapist, still maintaining the facade of a respectable medical professional. The trial began in April 2013 and lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented their forensic evidence, Joe Lynn's testimony about the notebook, and witnesses who testified about Russell's financial problems and gambling addiction. They showed the jury crime scene photos with expert analysis explaining the blood void pattern and the impossible angle of the gunshot wound. But the moment that truly sealed Russell's fate came during the cross-examination of the defense's forensic expert. The defense had hired Dr. Marcus Webb, a respected pathologist who argued that Barbara could have shot herself. Prosecutor Sarah Brennan asked Dr. Webb a simple question. "Doctor, in your 30 years of experience, how many suicides have you examined where the victim shot themselves behind the ear at a downward angle while lying in bed?" Dr. Webb paused. The courtroom was silent. "None," he finally admitted. "And how many homicides have you examined with that exact wound pattern?" Brennan pressed. 7, Dr. Webb said quietly. All 7 were ruled homicides. The defense case collapsed in that moment. The jury could see the truth. Russell Stager had murdered his wife and staged it as a suicide, using his medical knowledge to try to fool investigators. But the most emotional moment came when Barbara's sister, Christine, took the stand during the victim impact statement portion of the trial. With tears streaming down her face, she held up a photograph of Barbara taken just days before her death. Smiling, vibrant, full of life. For 27 years, Christine said, her voice breaking, our family believed my sister took her own life. We blamed ourselves. We thought we'd missed signs of depression. We carried guilt every single day. Russell didn't just kill Barbara. He tortured our entire family for nearly 3 decades. He made us believe she didn't want to live, when the truth was she was planning her future without him. She wanted to live. She wanted to be free. And he murdered her for that. The courtroom erupted in sobs. Even the judge had to pause to compose himself. On May 3, 2013, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Russell Stager showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He'd maintained his innocence throughout the trial, insisting Barbara had killed herself. Even when faced with overwhelming evidence, he refused to admit what he'd done. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At 63 years old, Russell Stager would die behind bars. As he was led away in handcuffs, Russell turned back one last time. Detective Thompson, now 72 years old and officially retired, sat in the gallery. Their eyes met. Thompson had spent 27 years pursuing justice for Barbara. He'd never given up. He'd never forgotten. Russell looked away first. The Barbara Stager case fundamentally changed how investigators approach suspicious deaths. The blood void pattern analysis technique used to prove Russell's guilt has since been employed in hundreds of cases nationwide. It's now standard practice in forensic training. Detective Mike Thompson passed away in 2019 at the age of 78. His obituary mentioned his dedication to Barbara's case and how his persistence led to justice after nearly 3 decades. His family donated his case files to the Forensic Science Academy, where they're used to train new investigators about the importance of never giving up on cold cases. Jo Lynn Snow, the second wife who bravely came forward, has since become an advocate for domestic violence survivors. She speaks at conferences about recognizing warning signs and the importance of trusting your instincts. She credits her decision to come forward with saving Patricia's life and possibly preventing other murders. Patricia, Russell's third wife, divorced him immediately after his arrest. She cooperated fully with investigators and provided additional evidence about Russell's planning. She later revealed that Russell had asked her to sign updated life insurance paperwork the day before his arrest. The new policy would have been worth $500,000. Barbara's family finally found peace. Her gravesite, which had been marked simply with her name and dates, was updated with a new inscription: Beloved teacher, sister, friend. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Rest in peace, 1952 to 1985. Justice 2013. The case serves as a powerful reminder that the perfect crime doesn't exist. Criminals can plan meticulously, study forensics, stage evidence, and think they've covered every angle. But they can't predict how science will evolve, how witnesses will eventually come forward, or how determined investigators will pursue justice no matter how many years pass. Russell Stager is currently incarcerated at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. He's 75 years old. He's never admitted to killing Barbara. He continues to maintain his innocence, filing appeals that are routinely denied. He'll die in prison just as he deserves. Barbara Stager was 43 years old when she was murdered. She had her whole life ahead of her. She planned to leave an abusive marriage and start fresh. She never got that chance. But 27 years after her death, she finally got justice. And sometimes that's all we can hope for in cases like this. That the truth eventually comes out. That the guilty are eventually punished. That the victims are eventually remembered not for how they died, but for how they lived. Barbara Stager lived as a devoted teacher who touched countless young lives. She lived as a caring sister and loyal friend. And now, thanks to determined investigators and evolving forensic science, her legacy includes one more thing. She became the reason a cold-blooded killer was finally brought to justice. Her death taught us that even the most meticulously planned murder will eventually unravel. That science keeps advancing, witnesses keep coming forward, and dedicated investigators never truly give up. The perfect murder doesn't exist, because there's always one detail the killer didn't account for, one microscopic piece of evidence that eventually tells the truth. In Russell Stager's case, that evidence was invisible to the naked eye in 1985. But technology evolved, techniques improved, and the blood spatter that Russell thought meant nothing became the evidence that convicted him of murder. If this story taught us anything, it's this: justice may be delayed, but it doesn't have an expiration date. Cold cases can warm up decades later. Evidence that once seemed meaningless can become crucial with new technology. And killers who think they've gotten away with a perfect crime should remember: science keeps evolving, and investigators never forget. If you found this story compelling and want to hear more deep dives into true crime cases that changed forensic science, please subscribe to my channel. We explore the cases that shocked the world, the investigations that never gave up, and the tiny details that crack seemingly perfect crimes. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Justice delayed is not justice denied, and we're here to tell those stories, one case at a time. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay informed, and remember, the truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how long it takes.